Book 22 of the Iliad of Homer, rendered into English blank verse by Edward, Earl of Derby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Your reader, Michael Armenta. Argument: The death of Hector. The Trojans, being safe within the walls, Hector only stays to oppose Achilles. Priam is struck at his approach, and tries to persuade his son to re-enter the town. Hecuba joins his entreaties, but in vain. Hector consults within himself what measures to take, but at the advance of Achilles his resolution fails him, and he flies. Achilles pursues him thrice round the walls of Troy. The gods debate concerning the fate of Hector. At length Minerva descends to the aid of Achilles. She deludes Hector in the shape of Deiphobus. He stands the combat, and is slain. Achilles drags the dead body at his chariot in the sight of Priam and Hecuba. Their lamentations, tears, and despair. Their cries reach the ears of Andromache, who, ignorant of this, was retired into the inner part of the palace. She mounts up to the walls, and beholds her dead husband. She swoons at the spectacle, her excess of grief and lamentation. The 30th day still continues. The scene lies under the walls, and on the battlements of Troy. Thus they, from panic flight, like timorous fawns, within the walls escaping, dried their sweat, and drank, and quench'd their thirst, reclining safe on the fair battlements. But nearer drew with slanted shields the Greeks. Yet Hector, still in front of Ilium and the Scaean gate, stayed by his evil doom, remained without. Then Phoebus thus to Peleus' godlike son: Achilles, why with active feet pursue? Thou mortal, me immortal. Knowest thou not my godhead, that so hot thy fury burns? Or heed'st thou not that all the Trojan host, whom thou hast scared, while thou art here withdrawn, within the walls a refuge safe have found? On me thy sword is vain, I know not death. Enraged Achilles, swift of foot, replied: Deep is the injury, far-darting king, most hostile of the gods, that at thy hand I bear, who here hast lured me from the walls, which many a Trojan else had fail'd to reach, ere by my hand they bit the bloody dust. Me of immortal honour thou hast robb'd, and them, thyself from vengeance safe, hast saved. Had I the power, that vengeance thou shouldst feel. Thus saying, and on mightiest deeds intent, he turn'd him cityward with fiery speed. As when a horse, contending for the prize, whirls the swift car, and stretches o'er the plain, e'en so with active limbs Achilles raced. Him first the aged Priam's eyes discern'd, scouring the plain, in arms all dazzling bright, like to the autumnal star, whose brilliant ray shines eminent amid the depth of night, whom men the dog-star of Orion call. The brightest he, but sign to mortal man of evil augury and fiery heat. so shone the brass upon the warrior's breast. The old man groaned aloud, and lifting high his hands, he beat his head, and with loud voice called on his son, imploring. He, unmoved, held post before the gates, awaiting there Achilles' fierce encounter. Him his sire, with hands outstretched and piteous tone, addressed. Hector, my son, await not here alone that warrior's charge, lest thou to fate succumb beneath Pelides' arm, thy better far. Accursed be he! Would that the immortal gods so favour'd him as I, then should his corpse soon to the vultures and the dogs be given. So should my heart a load of anguish lose, by whom I am of many sons bereaved, many and brave, whom he has slain or sold to distant isles in slavery. And e'en now within the city walls I look in vain for two, Lycian brave, and Polydore, my gallant sons by fair Laothoe. If haply yet they live, with brass and gold their ransom shall be paid. Good store of these we can command, for with his daughter fair a wealthy dowry aged Altes gave. But to the viewless shades should they have gone, deep where their mother's sorrow and my own. But of the general public well I know, far lighter were the grief than if they heard that thou hadst fallen beneath Achilles' hand. Then enter now, my son, the city gates, and of the women and the men of Troy be still the guardian, nor to Peleus' son with thine own life immortal glory give. Look too on me with pity, me on whom, e'en on the threshold of mine age, hath Jove a bitter burthen cast, condemn'd to see my sons struck down, my daughters dragg'd away in servile bonds, our chambers' sanctity invaded, and our babes by hostile hands dash'd to the ground, and by ferocious Greeks enslaved, the widows of my slaughter'd sons. On me at last the ravening dogs shall feed, when by some foeman's hand, by sword or lance, my soul shall from my body be divorced. Those very dogs which I myself have bred, fed at my table, guardians of my gate, shall lap my blood, and overgorged shall lie e'en on my threshold. That a youth should fall victim to Mars beneath a foeman's spear may well beseem his years, and if he fall with honour, though he die, yet glorious he. But when the hoary head and hoary beard and naked corpse to ravening dogs are given, no sadder sight can wretched mortals see." The old man spoke, and from his head he tore the hoary hair. Yet Hector firm remained. Then to the front his mother rush'd, in tears, her bosom bare, with either hand her breast sustaining, and with tears address'd him thus: "Hector, my child, thy mother's breast revere, and on this bosom, if thine infant woes have e'er been hush'd, bear now in mind, dear child, the debt thou owest, and from within the walls ward off this fearful man, nor in the field encounter, cursed be he. Should he prevail and slay thee, not upon the funeral bed, my child, my own, the offspring of my womb, shall I deplore thee, nor thy widowed wife, but far away, beside the Grecian ships, thy corpse shall to the rav'ning dogs be given." Thus they, with tears and earnest prayers imploring, addressed their son. Yet Hector firm remained, waiting the approach of Peleus' godlike son. As when a snake upon the mountainside, with deadly venom charged, beside his hole awaits the traveller, and filled with rage, coiled round his hole, his baleful glances darts, so, filled with dauntless courage, Hector stood, scorning retreat, his gleaming buckler propped against the jutting tower. Then, deeply moved, thus with his warlike soul communion held: "Oh, woe is me! If I should enter now the city gates, I should the just reproach encounter of Polydamas, who first his counsel gave within the walls to lead the Trojan forces, on that fatal night when great Achilles in the field appear'd. I heeded not his counsel. Would I had! Now, since my folly hath the people slain, I well might blush to meet the Trojan men and long-robed dames of Troy, lest some might say, to me inferior far, this woeful loss to Hector's blind self-confidence we owe. Thus shall they say. 'Twere better far, or from Achilles, slain in open fight, back to return in triumph, or myself to perish nobly in my country's cause. What if my bossy shield I lay aside, and stubborn helmet, and, my ponderous spear propping against the wall, go forth to meet the unmatch'd Achilles? What if I engage that Helen's self, and with her all the spoil, and all that Paris in his hollow ships brought here to Troy, whence first this war arose, should be restored, and to the Greeks be paid an ample tribute from the city's store, her secret treasures, and hereafter bind the Trojans by their elders' solemn oaths, not to withhold, but fairly to divide whate'er of wealth our much-lov'd city holds. But wherefore entertain such thoughts, my soul? Should I so meet him, what if he should show nor pity nor remorse, but slay me there, defenceless as a woman, and unarm'd? Not this the time, nor he the man, with whom, by forest oak or rock, like youth and maid, to hold light talk, as youth and maid might hold. Better to dare the fight, and know at once to whom the victory is decreed by Heaven." Thus as he stood, he mused, but near approach'd Achilles, terrible as plumed Mars, from his right shoulder brandishing aloft the ashen spear of Peleus, while around flash'd his bright armour, dazzling as the glare of burning fire, or of the rising sun. Hector beheld, and trembled at the sight, nor dared he there await the attack, but left the gates behind, and, terror-stricken, fled. Forward with flying foot Pelides rush'd, as when a falcon, bird of swiftest flight, from some high mountain top on timorous dove swoops fiercely down. She, from beneath, in fear evades the stroke; he, dashing through the brake, shrill shrieking, pounces on his destined prey. So Hector, flying from his keen pursuit, beneath the walls his active sinews plied. They by the watchtower, and beneath the wall, where stood the wind-beat fig tree, raced amain along the public road, until they reach'd the fairly flowing fount, whence issued forth, from double source, Scamander's eddying streams. One with hot current flows, and from beneath, as from a furnace, clouds of steam arise. Mid summer's heat, the other rises cold as hail, or snow, or water crystallized. Beside the fountains stood the washing troughs of well-wrought stone, where erst the wives of Troy and daughters fair their choicest garments wash'd, in peaceful times, ere came the sons of Greece. There raced they, one in flight, and one pursuing. Good he who fled, but better who pursued with fiery speed. For on that race was staked no common victim, no ignoble ox. The prize at stake was mighty Hector's life. As when the solid-footed horses fly around the course, contending for the prize, tripod, or woman, of her lord bereft, so raced they thrice around the walls of Troy, with active feet. And all the gods beheld. Then thus began the sire of gods and men: "A woeful sight mine eyes behold, a man I love in flight around the walls. My heart for Hector grieves, who, now upon the crown of deeply furrow'd Ida, now again on Ilium's heights, with fat of choicest bulls hath piled mine altar, whom around the walls with flying speed Achilles now pursues. Give me your counsel, gods, and say, from death if we shall rescue him, or must he die, brave as he is, beneath Pelides' hand?" To whom the blue-eyed goddess Pallas thus: "O father, lightning-flashing, cloud-girt king, what words are these? Wouldst thou, a mortal man, long doom'd by fate, again from death preserve? Do as thou wilt, but not with our consent." To whom the Cloud Compeller thus replied: "Be of good cheer, my child. Unwillingly I speak, yet both thy wishes to oppose. Have then thy will, and draw not back thy hand." His words fresh impulse gave to Pallas' zeal, and from Olympus' heights in haste she sped. Meanwhile on Hector, with untiring hate, the swift Achilles press'd, as when a hound through glen and tangled brake pursues a fawn, roused from its lair upon the mountain side, and if awhile it should evade pursuit, low crouching in the copse, yet quests he back, searching unwearied till he find the trace. So Hector sought to baffle, but in vain, the keen pursuit of Peleus' active son. Oft as he sought the shelter of the gates beneath the well-built towers, if haply thence his comrades' weapons might some aid afford, so oft his foemen with superior speed would cut him off, and turn him to the plain. He toward the city still essay'd his flight, and, as in dreams, when one pursues in vain, one seeks in vain to fly, the other seeks as vainly to pursue, so could not now Achilles reach, nor Hector quit his foe. Yet how should Hector now the doom of death have 'scaped, had not Apollo once again, and for the last time, to his rescue come, and given him strength and suppleness of limb? Then to the crowd Achilles with his head made sign that none at Hector should presume to cast a spear, lest one might wound, and so the greater glory obtain, while he himself must be contented with the second place. But when the fourth time in their rapid course the founts were reach'd, the eternal Father hung his golden scales aloft, and placed in each the lots of doom, for great Achilles one, for Hector one, and held them by the midst. Down sank the scale, weighted with Hector's death, down to the shades, and Phoebus left his side. Then to Pelides came the blue-eyed maid, and stood beside him, and bespoke him thus: "Achilles, loved of Heav'n, I trust that now to thee and me great glory shall accrue in Hector's fall, insatiate of the fight. Escape he cannot now, though at the feet of aegis-bearing Jove, on his behalf, with earnest prayer, Apollo prostrate fall. But stay thou here and take thy breath, while I persuade him to return and dare the fight." So Pallas spoke, and he, with joy obeying, stood leaning on his brass-barbed ashen spear. The goddess left him there, and went, the form and voice assuming of Deiphobus, in search of godlike Hector. Him she found, and standing near, with winged words addressed: "Sorely, good brother, hast thou been bested by fierce Achilles, who around the walls hath chased thee with swift foot. Now stand we both for mutual succour, and his onset wait." To whom great Hector of the glancing helm: "Deiphobus, of all my brothers, sons of Hecuba and Priam, thou hast been still dearest to my heart; and now the more I honour thee, who dar'st on my behalf, seeing my peril, from within the walls to sally forth, while others skulk behind." To whom the blue-eyed goddess thus replied: "With many prayers, good brother, both our sire and honour'd mother, and our comrades all, successively implored me to remain. Such fear is fallen on all. But in my soul, on thine account, too deep a grief I felt. Now forward boldly, spare we not our spears. Make trial, if Achilles to the ships from both of us our bloody spoils can bear, or by thine arm himself may be subdued." Thus Pallas leer'd him on with treacherous wile. But when the two were met, and close at hand, first spoke great Hector of the glancing helm. "No more before thee, Peleus' son, I fly. Thrice have I fled around the walls, nor dared await thine onset. Now my spirit is roused to stand before thee, to be slain or slay. But let us first the immortal gods invoke, the surest witnesses and guardians they of compacts. At my hand no foul disgrace shalt thou sustain, if Jove with victory shall crown my firm endurance, and thy life to me be forfeit. Of thine armour stripp'd I promise thee, Achilles, to the Greeks thy body to restore. Do thou the like." With fierce regard Achilles answer'd thus: "Hector, thou object of my deadly hate, talk not to me of compacts. As 'tween men and lions no firm concord can exist, nor wolves and lambs in harmony unite, but ceaseless enmity between them dwells. So not in friendly terms, nor compact firm, can thou and I unite, till one of us glut with his blood the mail-clad warrior Mars. Mind thee of all thy fence; behooves thee now to prove a spearman skill'd, and warrior brave. For thee escape is none. Now by my spear hath Pallas doom'd thy death. My comrade's blood, which thou hast shed, shall all be now avenged." He said, and poising hurl'd his weighty spear. But Hector saw, and shunn'd the blow. He stoop'd, and o'er his shoulder flew the brass-tipp'd spear, and in the ground was fix'd. But Pallas drew the weapon forth, and to Achilles' hand, all unobserved of Hector, gave it back. Then Hector thus to Peleus' matchless son: "Thine aim has fail'd, nor truly has my fate, thou godlike son of Peleus, been to thee from heav'n reveal'd. Such was indeed thy boast, but flippant was thy speech, and subtly fram'd to scare me with big words, and make me prove false to my wonted prowess and renown. Not in my back will I receive thy spear, but through my breast confronting thee, if Jove have to thine arm indeed such triumph given. Now, if thou canst, my spear in turn elude, may it be deeply buried in thy flesh. For lighter were to Troy the load of war, if thou, the greatest of her foes, wert slain." He said, and poising hurl'd his ponderous spear, nor miss'd his aim. Full in the midst he struck Pelides' shield, but glancing from the shield the weapon bounded off. Hector was grieved that thus his spear had bootless left his hand. He stood aghast; no second spear was nigh, and loudly on Deiphobus call'd a spear to bring. But he was far away. Then Hector knew that he was duped, and cried, "O heaven! the gods above have doom'd my death. I deem'd indeed that brave Deiphobus was near at hand, but he within the walls is safe, and I by Pallas am betray'd. Now is my death at hand, nor far away; escape is none, since so hath Jove decreed, and Jove's far-darting son, who heretofore have been my guards, my fate hath found me now. Yet not without a struggle let me die, nor all inglorious; but let some great act, which future days may hear of, mark my fall." Thus as he spoke, his sharp-edged sword he drew, ponderous and vast, suspended at his side, collected for the spring, and forward dash'd. As when an eagle, bird of loftiest flight, through the dark clouds swoops downward on the plain, to seize some tender lamb, or cowering hare, so Hector rush'd, and wav'd his sharp-edged sword. Achilles' wrath was rous'd, with fury wild his soul was fill'd. Before his breast he bore his well-wrought shield, and fiercely on his brow nodded the four-plumed helm, as on the breeze floated the golden hairs, with which the crest by Vulcan's hand was thickly interlaced. And as amid the stars' unnumber'd host, when twilight yields to night, one star appears, Hesper, the brightest star that shines in heaven, gleam'd the sharp-pointed lance, which in his right Achilles poised, on godlike Hector's doom intent, and scanning eagerly to see where from attack his body least was fenced. All else the glittering armour guarded well, which Hector from Patroclus' corpse had stripped. One chink appear'd just where the collar-bone, the neck and shoulder parts, beside the throat, where lies exposed the swiftest road of death. There levell'd he, as Hector onward rush'd. Right through the yielding neck the lance was driven, but sever'd not the windpipe, nor destroyed his power of speech. Prone in the dust he fell, and o'er him vaunting, thus Achilles spoke: "Hector, Patroclus stripping of his arms, thy hope was that thyself wast safe, and I, not present, brought no terror to thy soul. Fool! in the hollow ships I yet remain'd, I, his avenger, mightier far than he, I, who am now thy conqueror. By the dogs and vultures shall thy corpse be foully torn, while him the Greeks with funeral rites shall grace." Whom answer'd Hector of the glancing helm, prostrate and helpless: "By thy soul, thy knees, thy parents' heads, Achilles, I beseech, let not my corpse from Grecian dogs be torn. Accept the ample stores of brass and gold, which as my ransom by my honour'd sire and mother shall be paid thee, but my corpse restore, that so the men and wives of Troy may deck with honours due my funeral pyre." To whom with fierce aspect Achilles thus Knee me no knees, vile hound, nor prate to me of parents. Such my hatred, that almost I could persuade myself to tear and eat thy mangled flesh. Such wrongs I have to avenge. He lives not who can save thee from the dogs. Not though with ransom 10 and 20-fold he here should stand, and yet should promise more. No, not though Priam's royal self should sue to be allowed for gold to ransom thee. No, not e'en so thy mother shall obtain to lay thee out upon the couch, and mourn o'er thee, her offspring. But on all thy limbs shall dogs and carrion vultures make their feast. To whom thus Hector of the glancing helm, dying: I know thee well, nor did I hope to change thy purpose. Iron is thy soul, but see that on thy head I bring not down the wrath of heaven, when by the Scaean gate the hand of Paris, with Apollo's aid, brave warrior as thou art, shall strike thee down." E'en as he spoke, his eyes were closed in death, and to the viewless shades his spirit fled, mourning his fate, his youth and vigour lost. To him, though dead, Achilles thus replied: "Die thou! My fate I then shall meet, whene'er Jove and th' immortal gods shall so decree." He said, and from the corpse his spear withdrew, and laid aside; then stripped the armour off, with blood besmear'd. The Greeks around him throng'd, gazing on Hector's noble form and face, and none approach'd that did not add a wound. And one to other look'd and said, "Good faith, Hector is easier far to handle now, than when erewhile he wrapp'd our ships in fire." Thus would they say, then stab the dead anew. But when the son of Peleus, swift of foot, had stripped the armour from the corpse, he rose, and standing thus the assembled Greeks addressed: "O friend, the chiefs and councillors of Greece, since Heav'n hath granted us this man to slay, whose single arm hath wrought us more of ill than all the rest combined, advance we now before the city in arms, and trial make what is the mind of Troy, if, Hector slain, they from the citadel intend retreat, or still, despite their loss, their ground maintain. But wherefore entertain such thoughts, my soul? Beside the ships, unwept, unburied, lies Patroclus, whom I never can forget, while number'd with the living, and my limbs have pow'r to move. In Hades, though the dead may be forgotten, yet e'en there will I the memory of my lov'd companion keep. Now to the ships return, we, sons of Greece, glad paeans singing. With us he shall go, great glory is ours, the godlike Hector slain, the pride of Troy, and as a god revered. And foully Hector's corpse misused. Of either foot he pierced the tendon through, that from the ankle passes to the heel, and to his chariot bound with leathern thongs, leaving the head to trail along the ground. Then mounted, with the captured arms, his car, and urged his horses. Nothing loth they flew. A cloud of dust the trailing body raised. Loose hung his glossy hair, and in the dust was laid that noble head, so graceful once, now to foul insult doom'd by Jove's decree, in his own country by a foeman's hand. So lay the head of Hector. At the sight his aged mother tore her hair, and far from off her head the glittering veil she threw, and with loud cries her slaughter'd son bewailed. Piteous his father groan'd, and all around was heard the voice of wailing and of woe. Such was the cry, as if the beetling height of Ilium all were smouldering in the fire. Scarce in his anguish could the crowd restrain. The old man, from issuing through the Dardan gates, low in the dust he roll'd, imploring all, entreating by his name each several man. Forbear, my friends, though sorrowing, stay me not. Leave me to reach alone the Grecian ships, and there implore this man of violence, this haughty chief, if haply he my years may reverence, and have pity on my age, for he too has a father, like to me, Peleus, by whom he was begot and bred, the bane of Troy, and most of all to me, the cause of endless grief, who by his hand have been of many stalwart sons bereft. Yet all, though grieved for all, I less lament than one whose loss will sink me to the grave, Hector. Oh, would to Heaven that in mine arms he could have died! With mourning then, and tears, we might have satisfied our grief, both she who bore him, hapless mother, and myself. Weeping he spoke, and with him wept the crowd. Then 'mid the women Hecuba pour'd forth her vehement grief. My child, oh, whither now, heart-stricken, shall I go, of thee bereft? Of thee, who wast to me by night and day and a boast, the strength of all the men of Troy, and women, as a god they worshipped thee. For in thy life thou wast the glory of all, but fate hath found thee now. Weeping she spoke, but not as yet was known to Hector's wife. To her no messenger had brought the tidings, that without the walls remained her husband. In her house, withdrawn, a web she wove, all purple, double wool, with varied flowers in rich embroidery, and to her neat-haired maidens gave command to place the largest cauldrons on the fire, that with warm baths, returning from the fight, Hector might be refresh'd. Unconscious she, that by Achilles' hand, with Pallas' aid, far from the path, was godlike Hector slain. The sounds of wailing reach'd her from the tower, totter'd her limbs, the distaff left her hand, and to her neat-hair'd maidens thus she spoke: "Haste, follow me, some too, that I may know what mean these sounds. My honour'd mother's voice I hear, and in my breast my beating heart leaps to my mouth, my limbs refuse to move. Some evil, sure, on Priam's house impends. Be unfulfill'd my words, yet much I fear lest my brave Hector be cut off alone by great Achilles from the walls of Troy, chased to the plain, the desperate courage quench'd, which ever led him from the general ranks far in advance, and bade him yield to none." Then from the house she rush'd, like one distract with beating heart, and with her went her maids. But when she reach'd the tower, where stood the crowd, and mounted on the wall, she look'd around, and saw the body, which with insult foul the flying steeds were dragging toward the ships. Then sudden darkness overspread her eyes, backward she fell, and gasp'd her spirit away. Far off were flung the adornments of her head, the net, the fillet, and the woven bands, the nuptial veil by golden Venus given, that day when Hector of the glancing helm led from Eetion's house his wealthy bride. The sisters of her husband round her press'd, and held, as in the deadly swoon she lay. But when her breath and spirit return'd again, with sudden burst of anguish thus she cried: "Hector, oh, woe is me! To misery we both were born alike, Thou here in Troy, in Priam's royal palace; I in Thebes, by wooded Placos, in Eetion's house, who nursed my infancy. Unhappy he, unhappier I! Would I had ne'er been born! Now thou beneath the depths of earth art gone, Gone to the viewless shades, and me hast left A widow in thy house, in deepest woe, Our child an infant still, thy child and mine, Ill-fated parents both; nor thou to him, Hector, shalt be a guard, nor he to thee. For though he 'scape this tearful war with Greece, Yet not for him remains, but ceaseless woe, And strangers on his heritage shall seize. No young companions own the orphan boy. With downcast eyes, and cheeks bedew'd with tears, His father's friends approaching, pinch'd with want, he hangs upon the skirt of one he plucks the cloak. Perchance, in pity, some may at their tables let him sip the cup, moisten his lips, but scarce his palate touch; while youths, with both surviving parents bless'd, may drive him from their feast with blows and taunts. Begone! Thy father sits not at our board." Then, weeping, to his widow'd mother's arms he flies, That orphan boy, Astyanax, who on his father's knees erewhile was fed On choicest marrow and the fat of lambs. And when in sleep his childish play was hush'd, was lull'd to slumber in his nurse's arms, on softest couch, by all delights surrounded. But grief awaits him now, Astyanax, of Trojans so surnamed, since thou alone wast Troy's defence and guard. But now on thee, beside the beaked ships, far from thy parents, when the rav'ning dogs have had their fill, the wriggling worms shall feed. On thee all naked, while within thy house lies store of raiment, rich and rare, the work of women's hands. These will I burn with fire. Not for thy need, thou ne'er shalt wear them more, but for thine honour in the sight of Troy." Weeping she spoke, the women join'd her wail. End of Book 22. Book 23, Part 1 of The Iliad of Homer, rendered into English blank verse by Edward, Earl of Derby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Your reader, Michael Armenta. Argument: Funeral games in honor of Patroclus. Achilles and the Myrmidons do honor to the body of Patroclus. After the funeral feast he retires to the seashore, where, falling asleep, the ghost of his friend appears to him, and demands the rites of burial. The next morning the soldiers are sent with mules and wagons to fetch wood for the pyre, the funeral procession, and the offering their hair to the dead. Achilles sacrifices several animals, and lastly 12 Trojan captives at the pile, then sets fire to it. He pays libations to the winds, which, at the instance of Iris, rise and raise the flame. When the pile has burned all night, they gather the bones, place them in an urn of gold, and raise the tomb. Achilles institutes the funeral games, the chariot race, the fights of the cestus, the wrestling, the foot race, the single combat, the discus, the shooting with arrows, the darting the javelin, the various descriptions of which, and the various success of the several antagonists, make the greatest part of the book. In this book ends the 30th day. The night following, the ghost of Patroclus appears to Achilles. The 31st day is employed in felling the timber for the pile, the 32nd in burning it, and the 33rd in the games. The scene is generally on the seashore. Thus they, throughout the city, made their moan. But when the Greeks had come where lay their ships, by the broad Hellespont, their several ways they each pursued, dispersing. Yet not so Achilles let his Myrmidons disperse, but thus his warlike comrades he addressed. "My faithful comrades, valiant Myrmidons, loosed we not yet our horses from the cars, but for Patroclus mourn, approaching near with horse and car. Such tribute claim the dead, then free indulgence to our sorrows given. Loose we the steeds, and share the evening meal. he said, and they with mingled voices raised the solemn dirge. Achilles led the strain. Thrice round the dead they drove their sleek-skinned steeds. Mourning, with hearts by Thetis grief inspired, with tears the sands, with tears the warriors' arms were wet, so mighty was the chief they mourned. Then on his comrade's breast Achilles laid his blood-stained hands, and thus began the wail. "All hail, Patroclus, though in Pluto's realm! All that I promis'd, lo, I now perform, that on the corpse of Hector, hither dragg'd, our dogs should feed, and that 12 noble youths, the sons of Troy, before thy funeral pyre, my hand, in vengeance for thy death, should slay." He said, and foully Hector's corpse misused, flung prostrate in the dust, beside the couch where lay Menoetius' son. His comrades then their glittering armour doff'd, of polish'd brass, and loosed their neighing steeds. Then round the ship of Peleus' son in countless numbers sat, while he the abundant funeral feast dispensed. There many a steer lay stretch'd beneath the knife, and many a sheep, and many a bleating goat, and many a white-tusk'd porker, rich in fat, there lay extended, singeing o'er the fire, and blood in torrents flowed round the corpse. To Agamemnon then the kings of Greece, the royal son of Peleus, swift of foot, conducted. Yet with him they scarce prevail'd, so fierce his anger for his comrade's death. But when to Agamemnon's tent they came, he to the clear-voiced heralds gave command, an ample tripod on the fire to place, if haply Peleus' son he might persuade to wash away the bloody stains of war. But sternly he, and with an oath, refused. "No, by great Jove I swear, of all the gods highest and mightiest, water shall not touch this head of mine, till on the funeral pyre I see the body of Patroclus laid, and build his tomb, and cut my votive hair. For while I live and move mid mortal men, no second grief like this can pierce my soul. Observe we now the mournful funeral feast. But thou, great Agamemnon, king of men, send forth at early dawn, and to the camp bring store of fuel, and all else prepare, that with provision meet the dead may pass down to the realms of night. So shall the fire from out our sight consume our mighty dead, and to their wonted tasks the troops return." He said. They listened, and his words obeyed. Then busily the evening meal prepared, and shared the social feast, nor lacked there aught. The rage of thirst and hunger satisfied, each to their several tents the rest repaired. But on the many dashing ocean's shore Pelides lay, amid his myrmidons, with bitter groans. In a clear space he lay, where broke the waves, continuous on the beach. There, circumfused around him, gentle sleep, lulling the sorrows of his heart to rest, o'ercame his senses. For the hot pursuit of Hector round the breezy heights of Troy his active limbs had wearied. As he slept, sudden appear'd Patroclus' mournful shade, his very self, his height, and beauteous eyes, and voice, the very garb he wont to wear. Above his head it stood, and thus it spoke: "Sleep'st thou, Achilles, mindless of thy friend, neglecting not the living, but the dead? Hasten my funeral rites, that I may pass through Hades' gloomy gates. Ere those be done, the spirits and spectres of departed men drive me far from them, nor allow to cross the abhorred river. But forlorn and sad, I wander through the wide-spread realms of night. And give me now thy hand, whereon to weep, for never more, when laid upon the pyre, shall I return from Hades. Never more, apart from all our comrades, shall we two, as friends, sweet counsel take. For me, stern death, the common lot of man, has oped his mouth. Thou too, Achilles, rival of the gods, art destined here beneath the walls of Troy to meet thy doom. Yet one thing must I add, and make, if thou wilt grant it, one request: let not my bones be laid apart from thine, Achilles, but together, as our youth was spent together in thy father's house, since first my sire, Menoetius, me a boy from Opus brought, a luckless homicide, who of Amphidamas, by evil chance, had slain the son, disputing o'er the dice. Me noble Peleus in his house received, and kindly nursed, and thine attendant nam'd. So in one urn be now our bones enclosed, the golden vase, thy goddess mother's gift." Whom answer'd thus Achilles, swift of foot: "Why art thou here, lov'd being? Why on me these sev'ral charges lay? Whate'er thou bidst will I perform, and all thy mind fulfil. But draw thou near, and in one short embrace let us, while yet we may, our grief indulge." Thus as he spoke, he spread his longing arms, but not he clasp'd, and with a wailing cry vanish'd, like smoke, the spirit beneath the earth. Up sprang Achilles, all amazed, and smote his hands together, and lamenting cried: "O Heav'n, there are then, in the realms below, spirits and spectres, unsubstantial all. For through the night Patroclus' shade hath stood, weeping and wailing at my side, and told his bidding. The image of himself it seem'd." He said. His words the general grief aroused, To them, as round the piteous dead they mourn'd, appear'd the rosy-finger'd morn, and straight from all the camp, by Agamemnon sent, went forth in search of fuel, men and mules, led by a valiant chief, Meriones, the follower of renowned Idomeneus. Their felling axes in their hands they bore, and twisted ropes, their mules before them driven. Now up, now down, now sideways, now aslope, they journeyed on. But when they reached the foot of spring-abounding Ida, they began, with axes keen, to hew the lofty oaks. They, loudly crashing, fell. The wood they clove, and bound it to the mules. These took their way through the thick brushwood, hurrying to the plain. The axemen, too, so bade Meriones, the follower of renowned Idomeneus, were laden all with logs, which on the beach they laid in order, where a lofty mound, in memory of Patroclus and himself, Achilles had designed. When all the store of wood was duly laid, the rest remained in masses seated. But Achilles bade the warlike Myrmidons their armour don, and harness each his horses to his car. They rose and donned their arms, and on the cars warriors and charioteers their places took. First came the horse, and then a cloud of foot unnumber'd. In the midst Patroclus came, borne by his comrades. All the corpse with hair they cover'd o'er, which from their heads they shore. Behind, Achilles held his head, and mourn'd the noble friend whom to the tomb he bore. Then on the spot by Peleus' son assign'd, they laid him down, and piled the wood on high. Then a fresh thought Achilles' mind conceived. Standing apart, the yellow locks he shore, which, as an offering to Spercheius' stream, he nursed in rich profusion. Sorrowing then, looked o'er the dark blue sea, as thus he spoke. Spercheius, all in vain to thee his prayer my father Peleus made, and vow'd that I, return'd in safety to my native land, to thee should dedicate my hair, and pay a solemn hecatomb, with sacrifice of 50 rams, unblemish'd, to the springs whereon thy consecrated soil is placed, thine incense-honour'd altar. So he vow'd, but thou the boon withhold'st, since I no more my native land may see. The hair he vow'd to brave Patroclus thus I dedicate. He said, and on his comrade's hand he laid the locks. His act the general grief aroused. And now the setting sun had found them still indulging, and now the setting sun had found them still indulging o'er the dead. But Peleus' son, approaching, thus to Agamemnon spoke: Atrides, for to thee the people pay readiest obedience, mourning too prolonged may weary. Thou then from the pyre the rest disperse, and bid prepare the morning meal. Ours be the farther charge, to whom the dead was chiefly dear. Yet let the chiefs remain, the monarch Agamemnon heard, and straight dispersed the crowd amid their several ships. The appointed band remained, and piled the wood. 100 feet each way they built the pyre, and on the summit, sorrowing, laid the dead. Then many a sheep and many a slow-paced ox they flayed and dressed around the funeral pyre. Of all the beasts Achilles took the fat, and covered o'er the corpse from head to foot, then heaped the slaughtered carcasses around. Then jars of honey placed, and fragrant oils resting upon the couch. Next, groaning loud, 4 powerful horses on the pyre he threw. Then, of 9 dogs that at their master's board had fled, he slaughtered 2 upon his pyre. Last, with the sword, by evil counsel swayed, 12 noble youths he slew, the sons of Troy. The fire's devouring might he then applied, and, groaning, on his loved companion called. "All hail, Patroclus, though in Pluto's realm! All that I promised, lo, I now perform. On 12 brave sons of Trojan sires, with thee the flames shall feed. But Hector, Priam's son, not to the fire, but to the dogs I give." Such was Achilles' threat. But him the dogs molested not, for Venus, night and day, daughter of Jove, the ravening dogs restrained, and all the corpse o'erlaid with roseate oil, ambrosial, that, though dragged along the earth, the noble dead might not receive a wound. Apollo, too, a cloudy veil from heaven spread o'er the plain, and covered all the space where lay the dead. Nor let the blazing sun the flesh upon his limbs and muscles parch. Yet burnt not up Patroclus' funeral pyre. Then a fresh thought Achilles' mind conceived. Standing apart, on both the winds he called, Boreas and Zephyrus, and added vows of costly sacrifice, and pouring forth libations from a golden goblet, prayed their presence, that the wood might haste to burn, and with the fire consume the dead. His prayer swift Iris heard, and bore it to the winds. They in the hall of gusty Zephyrus were gather'd round the feast. In haste appearing, swift Iris on the stony threshold stood. They saw, and rising all, besought her each to sit beside him. She, with their requests, refused compliance, and addressed them thus: "No seat for me, for I, o'er the ocean stream, from hence am bound to Ethiopia's shore, to share the sacred feast, and hecatombs, which there they offered to the immortal gods. But Boreas, thee, and loud-voiced Zephyrus, with vows of sacrifice Achilles calls to fan the funeral pyre, whereon is laid Patroclus, mourn'd by all the host of Greece." She said, and vanish'd. They with rushing sound rose, and before them drove the hurrying clouds. Soon o'er the sea they swept. the stirring breeze ruffled the waves, the fertile shores of Troy they reached, and falling on the funeral pyre, loud roared the crackling flames. They all night long with current brisk together fanned the fire. All night Achilles from a golden bowl drew forth, and in his hand a double cup, the wine outpouring, moistened all the earth, still calling on his lost Patroclus' shade. As mourns a father o'er a youthful son, whose early death hath wrung his parents' hearts, so mourned Achilles over his friend's remains, prostrate beside the pyre, and groaned aloud. But when the star of Lucifer appeared, the harbinger of light, from whom following close spreads o'er the sea the saffron-robed morn, then paled the smouldering fire, and sank the flame, and o'er the Thracian sea that groaned and heaved beneath their passage, home the winds returned, and, weary, from the fire a space withdrawn, Achilles lay, o'ercome by gentle sleep. Anon, awakened by the tramp and din of crowds that followed Atreus' royal son, he sat upright, and thus addressed his speech: "Thou son of Atreus, and ye chiefs of Greece, far as the flames extended, quench we first with ruddy wine the embers of the pyre, and of Menoetius' son Patroclus next, with care distinguishing, collect the bones; nor are they hard to know, for in the midst he lay, while round the edges of the pyre horses and men commixed. The rest were burnt. Let these between a double layer of fat enclosed, and in a golden urn remain, till I myself shall in the tomb be laid, and o'er them build a mound, not over large, but of proportions meet. In days to come, ye Greeks, who after me shall here remain, complete the work, and build it broad and high." Thus spoke Achilles. They his words obeyed. Far as the flames had reach'd, and thickly strown the embers lay, they quench'd with ruddy wine. Then tearfully their gentle comrades' bones collected, and with double layers of fat enclosed, and in a golden urn encased. Then in the tent they laid them, overspread with veil of linen fair. Then, meting out the allotted space, the deep foundations laid around the pyre, and o'er them heaped the earth. Their task accomplish'd, all had now withdrawn, but Peleus' son the vast assembly stay'd, and bade them sit. Then prizes of the games, tripods and cauldrons, from the tents he brought, and noble steeds, and mules, and sturdy steers, and women fair of form, and iron hoar. First, for the contest of the flying cars, the prizes he displayed. A woman fair, well skill'd in household cares, a tripod vast, two-handled, 22 measures round. These both were for the victor. For the next, a mare unbroken, 6 years old, in foal of a mule colt. The third, a cauldron bright, capacious of 4 measures, white and pure, by fire as yet untarnished. For the 4th, of gold 2 talents. For the 5th, a vase with double cup, untouched by fire, he gave. Then, standing up, he thus addressed the Greeks: "Thou son of Atreus, and ye well-greaved Greeks, before ye are the prizes which await the contest of the cars. But if, ye Greeks, for any other cause these games were held, I to my tent should bear the foremost prize. For well ye know how far my steeds excel, steeds of immortal race, which Neptune gave to Peleus, he to me his son transferr'd. But from the present strife we stand aloof, my horses and myself. They now have lost the daring courage, and the gentle hand of him who drove them, and with water pure wash'd oft their manes, and bathed with fragrant oil. For him they stand and mourn, with drooping heads, down to the ground, their hearts with sorrow fill'd. But ye, in order range yourselves, who boast your well-built chariots, and your horses' speed." He said. Up sprang the eager charioteers, the first of all Eumelus, king of men, son of Admetus, matchless charioteer. Next Tydeus' son, the valiant Diomed, with Trojan horses from Aeneas won, when by Apollo's aid himself escaped. Then heav'n-born Menelaus, Atreus' son, 2 flying coursers harness'd to his car. His own Podargus had for yoke-fellow Ithae, a mare by Agamemnon lent. Her Echepolus to Atrides gave, Anchises' son, that to the wars of Troy he might not be compell'd, but safe at home enjoy his ease. For Jove had blessed his store with ample wealth in Sicyo's wide domain. Her now he yoked, impatient for the course. The 4th, Antilochus, the gallant son of Nestor, son of Neleus, mighty chief, harness'd his sleek-skinn'd steeds. Of Pylian race were they who bore his car. To him his sire sage counsel pour'd in understanding ears. "Antilochus, though young in years thou art, yet Jove and Neptune love thee, and have well instructed thee in horsemanship. Of me thou need'st no counsel, skill'd around the goal to whirl the chariot. But thou hast, of all, the slowest horses, whence I augur ill. But though their horses have the speed of thine, in skill not one of them surpasses thee. Then thou, dear boy, exert thine every art, that so thou mayest not to fail to gain a prize. By skill, far more than strength, the woodman fells the sturdy oak. By skill the steersman guides his flying ship across the dark blue sea, though shattered by the blast. 'Twixt charioteer and charioteer 'tis skill that draws the line. One, vainly trusting to his courser's speed, drives reckless here and there, o'er all the course his horses, unrestrained, at random run. Another, with inferior horses far, but better skill'd, still fixing on the goal his eye, turns closely round, nor overlooks the moment when to draw the rein, but holds his steady course, and on the leader waits. A mark I give thee now, thou canst not miss. There stands a withered trunk, some 6 feet high, of oak or pine, unrotted by the rain. On either side have 2 white stones been placed, where meet 2 roads, and all around there lies a smooth and level course. Here stood, perchance, the tomb of one who died long years ago, or former generations here have placed, as now Achilles hath decreed, a goal. There drive, as only not to graze the post, and leaning o'er the wicker body, leave close on the left the stones. Thine off-side horse then urge with voice and whip, and slack his rein, and let the near-side horse so closely graze, as that thy knave may seem to touch the goal. But yet beware, lest striking on the stone thy steeds thou injure, and thy chariot break, a source of triumph to thy rivals all, of shame to thee. But thou sage caution use, for following, if thou make the turn the first, not one of all shall pass thee, or o'ertake, not though Arion's self were in the car, Adrastus' flying steed of heavenly race, nor those which here Laomedon possessed. This said, and to his son his counsels given, the aged Nestor to his seat withdrew. 5th in the lists Meriones appeared. They mounted on their cars, and cast their lots. Achilles shook the helmet. First leaped forth the lot of Nestor's son, Antilochus. Next came the king Eumelus, after whom the valiant Menelaus, Atreus' son. The 4th Meriones, and last of all, but ablest far, Tydides drew his place. They stood in line. Achilles pointed out, here on the level plain, the distant goal, and there in charge the godlike Phoenix placed, his father's ancient follower, to observe the course assigned, and true report to make. Then all at once their whips they raised, and urged by rein, and hand, and voice, their eager steeds. They from the ships pursued their rapid course, athwart the distant plain. Beneath their chests rose, like a cloud or hurricane, the dust. Loose floated on the breeze their ample manes. The cars now skimmed along the fertile ground, now bounded high in air. The charioteers stood up aloft, and every bosom beat with hope of victory, each with eager shout cheering his steeds that scoured the dusty plain. But when the farthest limits of the course attained, they turned beside the hoary sea, strained to their utmost speed, were plainly seen the qualities of each. Then in the front appeared Eumelus' flying mares, and next the Trojan horses of Tydides came. Nor these were far behind, but following close, they seemed in act to leap upon the car. Eumelus, on his neck and shoulders broad, felt their warm breath, for o'er him, as they flew, their heads were downward bent, and now, perchance, had he, or pass'd, or made an even race, but that, incensed with valiant Diomed, Apollo wrested from his hands the whip. Then tears of anger from his eyelids fell, as gaining more and more the mares he saw, while, urged no more, his horses slacked their speed. But Pallas marked Apollo's treacherous wile, and hasting to the chief restored his whip, and to his horses strength and courage gave. The goddess then Admetus' son pursued, and snapped his chariot yoke. The mares, released, swerved from the track. The pole upon the ground lay loosened from the car, and he himself, beside the wheel, was from the chariot hurled. From elbows, mouth, and nose the skin was torn, his forehead crushed and battered in. His eyes were filled with tears, and mute his cheerful voice. Tydides turned aside, and far ahead of all the rest passed on, for Pallas gave his horses courage, and his triumph willed. Next him the fair-haired Menelaus came, the son of Atreus. But Antilochus thus to his father's horses called aloud: "Forward, and stretch ye to your utmost speed. I ask you not with those of Diomed in vain to strive, whom Pallas hath endued with added swiftness, and his triumph willed. But haste ye, and o'ertake Atrides' car, nor be by Ithae, by a mare, disgraced. Why, my brave horses, why be left behind? This too I warn ye, and will make it good. No more at Nestor's hand shall ye receive your provender, but with the sword be slain, if by your faults a lower prize be ours. Then rouse ye now, and put forth all your speed, and I will so contrive as not to fail of slipping past them in the narrow way." He said. The horses, of his voice in awe, put forth their powers awhile. Before them soon Antilochus the narrow pass espied. It was a gully where the winter's rain had lain collected, and had broken through a length of road, and hollowed out the ground. There Menelaus held his cautious course, fearing collision. But Antilochus, drawing his steeds a little from the track, bore down upon him sideways. Then in fear the son of Atreus to Antilochus shouted aloud: "Antilochus, thou driv'st like one insane! Hold in a while thy steeds. Here is no space where wider grows the road. There thou mayst pass, but here thou wilt but cause our cars to clash, and bring us both to harm." He said, but madlier drove Antilochus, plying the goad, as though he heard him not. Far as a discus' flight by some stout youth that tests his vigour, from the shoulder hurled, so far they ran together, side by side. Then dropped Atrides' horses to the rear, for he himself forbore to urge their speed, lest meeting in the narrow pass the cars should be o'erthrown, and they themselves, in haste to gain the victory, in the dust be rolled. Then thus reproachful to Antilochus: "Antilochus, thou most perverse of men, beshrew thy heart! We Greeks are much deceived, who gave thee fame for wisdom. Yet e'en now thou shalt not gain, but on thine oath, the prize." He said, and to his horses called aloud, "Slack not your speed, nor, as defeated, mourn. Their legs and feet will sooner tire than yours, for both are past the vigour of their youth." Thus he. The horses, of his voice in awe, put forth their powers, and soon the leaders neared. End of Book 23, Part 1. Book 23, Part 2 of the Iliad of Homer, rendered into English blank verse by Edward, Earl of Derby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Your reader, Michael Armenta. Meanwhile, the chieftains, seated in the ring, looked for the cars that scoured the dusty plain. The first to see them was Idomeneus, the Cretan king, for he, without the ring, was posted high aloft, and from afar he heard and knew the foremost horseman's voice. Well too he knew the gallant horse that led, all baying the rest, but on his front alone a star of white, full orbed as the moon. Then up he rose, and thus the Greeks addressed: "O friends, the chiefs and counsellors of Greece, can ye too see, or I alone, the cars? A different chariot seems to me in front, a different charioteer, and they who first were leading must have met with some mischance. I saw them late, ere around the goal they turned, but see them now no more, though all around my eyes explore the wide-spread plain of Troy. Perhaps the charioteer has dropped the reins, or round the goal he could not hold the mares. Perchance has missed the turn, and on the plain is lying now beside his broken car, while from the course his mettled steeds have flown. Stand up and look yourselves, I cannot well distinguish. But to me it seems a chief who reigns o'er the Greeks, though of Aetolian race, the son of Tydeus, valiant Diomed." Sharply Oileus' active son replied: "Idomeneus, why thus before the time so rashly speak, while the high-stepping steeds are speeding yet across the distant plain? Thine eyes are not the youngest in the camp, nor look they out the sharpest from thy head. But thou art ever hasty in thy speech, and ill becomes thee this precipitance. Since others are there here, thy betters far. The same are leading now, that led at first, Eumelus' mares. 'Tis he that holds the reins." To whom in anger thus the Cretan chief: "Ajax, at wrangling good, in judgment not; and for aught else, among the chiefs of Greece, of small account, so stubborn is thy soul. Wilt thou a tripod or a cauldron stake, and Agamemnon, Atreus' son, appoint the umpire to decide whose steeds are first? So shalt thou gain thy knowledge at thy cost." He said, up sprang Oileus' active son, in anger to reply, and farther yet had gone the quarrel. But Achilles' self stood up, and thus the rival chiefs addressed: "Forbear both, Ajax and Idomeneus, this bitter interchange of wordy war. It is not seemly, and yourselves, I know, another would condemn who so should speak. But stay ye here, and seated in the ring, their coming wait. Then, hurrying to the goal, we'll soon be here, and then shall each man know whose horses are the second, whose the first." Thus said. But Tydeus' son drew near, his lash still laid upon his horse's shoulder points, as lightly they, high-stepping, scoured the plain. Still on the charioteer the dust was flung, as close upon the flying-footed steeds followed the car with gold and tin inlaid, and lightly as they flew along were left impressed the wheel tracks on the sandy plain. There in the midst he stood, the sweat profuse downpouring from his horses' heads and chests. Down from the glittering car he leaped to earth, and leaned his whip against the chariot yoke. Nor long delayed the valiant Sthenelus, but eagerly sprang forth to claim the prize. Then to his brave companions gave in charge to lead away the woman, and to bear the tripod, while himself unyoked the steeds. Next came the horses of Antilochus, who had, by stratagem and not by speed, o'er Menelaus triumph'd. Yet e'en so Atrides' flying coursers press'd him hard, for but so far as from the chariot wheel a horse, when harness'd to a royal car, whose tail, back streaming, with the utmost hairs, brushes the felloes close before the wheel, small space between, he scours the wide-spread plain, so far was Menelaus in the rear of Nestor's son. At first a discus cast between them lay, but rapidly his ground gained, so well the speed and courage served of Ithae, Agamemnon's beauteous mare. And but a little farther were the course, had passed him by, nor left the race in doubt. Behind the noble son of Atreus came, a jav'lin's flight apart, Meriones, the faithful follower of Idomeneus. His were the slowest horses, and himself the least experienced in the rapid race. Dragging his broken car, came last of all, his horses driven in front, Admetus' son. Achilles, swift of foot, with pity saw, and to the Greeks his winged words address'd: "See where the best of all the last appears; but let him take, as meet, the second prize. The first belongs, of right, to Tydeus' son." Thus he. They all assented to his words, and by the general voice of Greece, the mare had now been his. But noble Nestor's son, Antilochus, stood up his right to claim, and to Achilles Peleus' son replied: "Achilles, thou wilt do me grievous wrong, if thou thy words accomplish; for my prize thou tak'st away, because mishap befell his car and horses by no fault of his. Yet had he to the Immortals made his prayer, he surely had not thus been last of all. But pitying him, if so thy mind incline, thy tents contain good store of gold and brass and sheep, and female slaves, and noble steeds. For him, of these hereafter mayst thou take a prize of higher value, or e'en now, and with the applause of all. But for the mare I will not give her up, and let who will stand forth. My own right hand shall guard my prize." He said, and smiled Achilles, swift of foot, delighted, for he loved the noble youth, to whom his winged words he thus addressed: "Antilochus, if such be thy request, that for Eumelus I should add a prize, and to him I give my breastplate, from Asteropaeus won, of brass, around whose edge is rolled a stream of shining tin, a gift of goodly price." He said, and bade Automedon, his friend and comrade, bring the breastplate from his tent. He went and brought it. In Eumelus' hand he placed it. He with joy the gift received. Then Menelaus, sad at heart, arose, burning with wrath against Antilochus. And while the herald in the monarch's hand his royal sceptre placed, and bade the Greeks keep silence, thus the godlike hero spoke: "Antilochus, till now reputed wise, what hast thou done? Thou hast impugned my skill, and sham'd my horses, who hast brought thine own, inferior far, before them to the goal. But come, ye chiefs and councillors of Greece, judge ye between us, favouring neither side, that none of all the brass-clad Greeks may say that Menelaus hath by false reports o'erborne Antilochus, and holds his prize, his horses fairly worsted, and himself triumphant only by superior power. Or come now, I myself will judgment give, nor deem I any Greek will find to blame in my decision, for 'tis fair and just. Antilochus, come forward, noble chief, and standing, as 'tis meet, before the car and horses, in thy hand the slender whip, wherewith thou drov'st, upon the horses lay thy hand, and by earth-shaking Neptune swear, that not of malice, and by set design, thou didst by fraud impede my chariot's course." To whom Antilochus with prudent speech: "Have patience with me yet, for I, O King, O Menelaus, am thy junior far. My elder and superior thee I own. Thou know'st the o'er-eager vehemence of youth, how quick in temper, and in judgment weak. Set then thy heart at ease. The mare I won I freely give, and if aught else of mine thou shouldst desire, would sooner give it all, than all my life be lower'd, illustrious King, in thine esteem, and sin against the Gods." Thus saying, noble Nestor's son led forth, and placed in Menelaus' hands the mare. the monarch's soul was melted, like the dew which glitters on the ears of growing corn that bristle o'er the plain. E'en so thy soul, O Menelaus, melted at his speech, to whom were thus addressed thy winged words. Antilochus, at once I lay aside my anger. Thou art prudent, and not apt to be thus led astray. But now thy youth thy judgment hath o'erpower'd. Seek not henceforth by trickery o'er thine elders to prevail. To any other man of all the Greeks I scarce so much had yielded, but for that thyself hast labour'd much, and much endur'd, thou, thy good sire, and brother, in my cause. I yield me to thy prayers, and give to boot the mare, though mine of right. I am not of a harsh, unyielding mood." He said, and to Noemon gave in charge, the faithful comrade of Antilochus, the mare. Himself the glittering cauldron took. Of gold 2 talents to the fourth assign'd, fourth in the race Meriones received. Still the fifth prize, a vase with double cup, remained. Achilles this to Nestor gave before the assembled Greeks, as thus he spoke: "Take this, old man, and for an heirloom keep, in memory of Patroclus' funeral games, whom thou no more amid the Greeks shalt see. Freely I give it thee, for thou no more canst box, or wrestle, or in sportive strife the javelin throw, or race with flying feet; for age with heavy hand hath bow'd thee down." He said, and placed it in his hand. The old man received with joy the gift, and thus replied: "All thou hast said, my son, is simple truth. No firmness now my limbs and feet retain, nor can my arms, with freedom, as of old, straight from the shoulder, right and left, strike out. Oh, that such youth and vigour yet were mine, as when the Epeans in Buprasium held the royal Amarynceus' funeral games, and when the monarch's sons his prizes gave. Then could not one of all the Epean race, or Pylians, or Aetolians, vie with me. In boxing, Clytomedes, Enops' son, I vanquish'd. Then Anchius, who stood up to wrestle with me, I with ease o'erthrew. Iphiclus I outran, though fleet of foot. In hurling with the spear, with Phyleus strove, and Polydorus, and surpass'd them both. The sons of Actor in the chariot race alone o'ercame me, as in number more, and grudging more my triumph, since remain'd this contest to reward the richest prize. They were twin brothers; one who held the reins still drove and drove, the other plied the whip. Such was I once, but now must younger men engage in deeds like these, and I, the chief of heroes once, must bow to weary age." But honour thou with fitting funeral games thy comrade. I accept, well pleas'd, thy gift, my heart rejoicing that thou still retain'st of me a kindly memory, nor o'erlook'st the place of honour which among the Greeks belongs to me of right. For this the gods reward thee with a worthy recompense." He said. Achilles listened to the praise of Neleus' son, then joined the general throng. Next he set forth the prizes to reward the labours of the sturdy pugilists. A hardy mule he tether'd in the ring, unbroken, 6 years old, most hard to tame. And for the vanquish'd man a double cup. Then rose, and to the Greeks proclaim'd aloud: "Thou son of Atreus, and ye well-greav'd Greeks, for these we bid 2 champions brave stand forth, and in the boxer's manly toil contend. And he, whose stern endurance Phoebus crowns with victory, recognized by all the Greeks, he to his tent shall lead the hardy mule. The loser shall the double cup receive." He said. Up sprang Epeius, tall and stout, a boxer skill'd, the son of Panopeus, who laid his hand upon the mule, and said: "Stand forth, if any care the cup to win. The mule, methinks, no Greek can bear away from me, who glory in the champion's name. Is't not enough that in the battle-field I claim no special praise? 'Tis not for man in all things to excel. But this I say, and will make good my words: who meets me here, I mean to pound his flesh, and smash his bones. See that his seconds be at hand, and prompt to bear him from the ring, by me subdued." He said. They all in silence heard his speech. Only Euryalus, the godlike chief, son of Mecistheus, Teleon's son, stood forth opposing. He had once in Thebes joined in the funeral games of Oedipus, and there had vanquish'd all of Cadmean race. On him attended valiant Diomed, with cheering words and wishes of success. Around his waist he fastened first the belt, then gave the well-cut gauntlets for his hands, of wild bull's hide. When both were thus equipped, into the centre of the ring they stepped. There, face to face, with sinewy arms upraised, they stood a while, then closed, strong hand with hand mingling in rapid interchange of blows. Dire was the clatter of their jaws, the sweat poured forth profuse from every limb. Then rush'd Epeius on, and full upon the cheek, half turn'd aside, let fall a stagg'ring blow. Nor stood Euryalus, but legs and feet knock'd from beneath him, prone to earth he fell. And as a fish that flounders on the sand, thrown by rude Boreas on the weedy beach, till cover'd o'er by the returning wave, so flounder'd he beneath that stunning blow. But brave Epeius took him by the hand, and raised him up. His comrades crowded round, and bore him from the field with dragging steps, spitting forth clotted gore, his heavy head rolling from side to side. Within his tent they laid him down, unconscious. To the ring then, back returning, bore away the cup. Achilles next before the Greeks display'd the prizes of the hardy wrestler's skill. The victor's prize, a tripod vast, fire-proof, and at 12 oxen by the Greeks appraised, and for the vanquish'd man a female slave, priced at 4 oxen, skill'd in household work. Then rose, and loudly to the Greeks proclaim'd, "Stand forth, whoe'er this contest will essay." He said, and straight uprose the giant form of Ajax Telamon. With him uprose Ulysses, skill'd in every crafty wile. Girt with the belt, within the ring they stood, and each with stalwart grasp laid hold on each. As stands 2 rafters of a lofty house, each propping each, by skilful architect design'd the tempest's fury to withstand. Creak'd their backbones beneath the tug and strain of those strong arms, their sweat pour'd down like rain. And bloody wheels of livid purple hue their sides and shoulders streak'd, as sternly they for victory and the well-wrought tripod strove. Nor could Ulysses Ajax overthrow, nor Ajax bring Ulysses to the ground, so stubbornly he stood. But when the Greeks were weary of the long protracted strife, thus to Ulysses mighty Ajax spoke: "Ulysses sage, Laertes' godlike son, or lift thou me, or I will thee uplift. The issue of our struggle rests with Jove." He said, and raised Ulysses from the ground. Nor he his ancient craft remember'd not, but lock'd his leg around, and striking sharp upon the hollow of the knee, the joint gave way. The giant Ajax backwards fell, Ulysses on his breast. The people saw and marvelled. Then in turn Ulysses strove Ajax to lift. A little way he moved, but fail'd to lift him fairly from the ground. Yet crook'd his knee, that both together fell, and side by side defiled with dust they lay. And now a third encounter they had tried, but rose Achilles, and the combat stay'd. "Forbear, nor waste your strength in farther strife. Ye both are victors. Both then bear away in equal meed of honour, and withdraw, that other Greeks may other contests wage." Thus spoke Achilles. They his words obey'd, and brushing off the dust, their garments donn'd. The prizes of the runners, swift of foot, Achilles next set forth. A silver bowl, 6 measures its content, for workmanship unmatch'd on earth, of Sidon's costliest art, the product rare. Thence o'er the misty sea, brought by Phoenicians, who in port arriv'd, gave it to Tossus, by Euenus last, the son of Jason, to Patroclus paid, in ransom of Lycon, Priam's son, which now Achilles, on his friend's behalf, assign'd as his reward, whoe'er should prove the lightest foot and speediest in the race. A steer well fattened was the second prize, and half a talent for the third of gold. He rose, and to the Greeks proclaim'd aloud, "Stand forth, whoe'er this contest will essay." He said. Up rose Oileus' active son. Up rose Ulysses, skill'd in every wile, and noble Nestor's son, Antilochus, who all the youth in speed of foot surpass'd. They stood in line. Achilles pointed out the limits of the course, as from the goal they stretch'd them to the race. Oileus' son first shot ahead, Ulysses following close. Nor farther than the shuttle from the breast of some fair women, when her outstretch'd arm has thrown the wool athwart the warp, and back withdraws it toward her breast, so close behind Ulysses press'd on Ajax, and his feet trod in his steps, ere settled yet the dust. His breath was on his shoulders, as the plain he lightly skimm'd, the Greeks with eager shouts still cheering, as he strain'd to win the prize. But as they near'd the goal, Ulysses thus to blue-eyed Pallas made his mental prayer: "Now hear me, Goddess, and my feet befriend." Thus as he pray'd, his prayer the Goddess heard, and all his limbs with active vigour fill'd. And as they stretch'd their hands to seize the prize, tripp'd up by Pallas, Ajax slipp'd and fell amid the offal of the lowing kine, which o'er Patroclus, Peleus' son, had slain. His mouth and nostrils were with offal fill'd. First in the race Ulysses bore away the silver bowl. The steer to Ajax fell, and as upon the horn he laid his hand, sputtering the offal out, he called aloud: "Lo, how the Goddess has my steps bewray'd, who guards Ulysses with a mother's care." Thus as he spoke, loud laugh'd the merry Greeks. Antilochus the sole remaining prize receiv'd, and, laughing, thus the Greeks address'd: "I tell you, friends, but what yourselves do know, how of the elder men the immortal Gods take special care. For Ajax' years not much exceed my own. But here we see a man, one of former age and race of men, a hale old man we call him, but for speed not one can match him, save Achilles' self." Thus he, with praise implied of Peleus' son, to whom in answer thus Achilles spoke: "Antilochus, not unobserv'd of me, nor unrewarded shall thy praise remain. To thy half-talent add this second half." Thus saying, In his hand he placed the gold. Antilochus with joy the gift received. Next in the ring the son of Peleus laid a ponderous spear, a helmet, and a shield. The spoil Patroclus from Sarpedon won. Then rose, and loudly to the Greeks proclaimed, "For these we call upon 2 champions brave to don their arms, their sharp-edged weapons grasp, and public trial of their prowess make. And he who first his rival's flesh shall reach, and through his armour piercing first draw blood, he shall this silver-studded sword receive, my trophy from Asteropaeus won, well wrought, of Thracian metal. But the arms in common property they both shall hold, and in my tent a noble banquet share." He said. Up rose great Ajax Telamon, and Tydeus' son, the valiant Diomed. First from the crowd apart they donn'd their arms. Then, eager for the fight, with haughty stare, stood in the midst. The Greeks admiring gazed. When each approaching other near they came, thrice rush'd they on, and thrice in combat closed. Then through the buckler round of Diomed great Ajax drove his spear, nor reach'd the point to Tydeus' body, but by the breastplate stay'd, while, aim'd above the mighty shield's defence, his glittering weapon flash'd at Ajax' throat. For Ajax, fearing, shouted then the Greeks to seize the fight, and share alike the prize. But from Achilles' hand the mighty sword, with belt and scabbard, Diomed received. Next in the ring the son of Peleus placed a ponderous mass of iron, as a quoit, once wielded by Aetion's giant strength, but to the ships with other trophies borne, when by Achilles' hand Aetion fell. Then rose and loudly to the Greeks proclaimed, "Stand forth, whoe'er this contest will essay. This prize who wins, though widely may extend his fertile fields, for 5 revolving years it will his wants supply; nor to the town, for lack of iron, with this mass in store, need he his shepherd or his ploughman send." He said, and valiant Polypoetes rose, Epeius, and Leonteus' godlike strength, and mighty Ajax, son of Telamon. Epeius first upraised the ponderous mass, and through the air hurled it, amid the laughter of the Greeks. Next came Leonteus, scion true of Mars. The third was Ajax, from whose stalwart hand beyond the farthest mark the missile flew. But when the valiant Polypoetes took the quoit in hand, far as a herdsman throws his staff, that, whirling, flies among the herd, so far beyond the ring's extremest bound he threw the ponderous mass. Loud were the shouts, and noble Polypoetes' comrades rose, and to the ships the monarch's gift conveyed. The archers' prizes next, of iron horn, 10 sturdy axes, double-edged, he placed, and single hatchets 10. Then far away rear'd on the sand a dark-browed vessel's mast, on which with slender string a timorous dove was fastened by the foot, the archer's mark. He, that who should strike the dove, should to his tent the axes bear away. But who the string should sever, but should fail to strike the bird, as less in skill the hatchets should receive. Thus spoke Achilles. Straight up rose the might of royal Teucer, and Meriones, the faithful follower of Idomeneus. They in a brass-bound helmet shook the lots. The first was Teucer's. With impetuous force he shot, but vowed not to the archer king of firstling lambs a solemn hecatomb. The dove he struck not, for the archer god withheld his aid, but close beside her foot the arrow severed the retaining string. The bird, released, soared heavenward, while the string dropped from the mast suspended towards the earth, and loudly shouted their applause the Greeks. Then snatched Meriones in haste the bow from Teucer's hand. His own already held his arrow, pointed straight. He drew the string, and to the far-destroying king he vowed of firstling lambs a solemn hecatomb. Aloft amid the clouds he marked the dove, and struck her as she soared beneath the wing. Right through the arrow passed, and to the earth returning fell beside Meriones. The bird upon the dark-prowed vessel's mast lighted a while, anon with drooping head and pinions fluttering vain, afar she fell, lifeless. The admiring crowd with wonder gazed. Meriones the axes bore away, while Teucer to the ships the hatchets bore. Last in the ring the son of Peleus laid a ponderous spear, and cauldron, burnish'd bright, priced at an ox's worth, untouched by fire, for those who with the javelin would contend. Up rose then Agamemnon, king of men, the son of Atreus, and Meriones, the faithful follower of Idomeneus. But Peleus' godlike son addressed them thus: "How far, Atrides, thou excell'st us all, and with the javelin, what thy pow'r and skill, preeminent, we know. Take thou this prize, and bear it to thy ships, and let us give to brave Meriones the brazen spear. If so it please thee, such were my advice." He said, and Agamemnon, king of men, assenting, gave to brave Meriones his brazen spear, while in Talthybius' care his herald placed the king his noble prize. End of Book 23, Part 2. Book 24, Part 1 of the Iliad of Homer, rendered into English blank verse by Edward, Earl of Derby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Your reader, Michael Armenta. Argument: the redemption of the body of Hector. The gods deliberate about the redemption of Hector's body. Jupiter sends Thetis to Achilles, to dispose him for the restoring it, and Iris to Priam, to encourage him to go in person and treat for it. The old king, notwithstanding the remonstrances of his queen, makes ready for the journey, to which he is encouraged by an omen from Jupiter. He sets forth in his chariot with a wagon loaded with presents, under the charge of Idaeus the herald. Mercury descends in the shape of a young man, and conducts him to the pavilion of Achilles. The conversation on the way. Priam finds Achilles at his table, casts himself at his feet, and begs for the body of his son. Achilles, moved with compassion, grants his request, detains him one night in his tent, and the next morning sends him home with the body. The Trojans run out to meet him. The lamentation of Andromache, Hecuba, and Helen, with the solemnities of the funeral. The time of 12 days is employed in this book, while the body of Hector lies in the tent of Achilles, and as many more are spent in the truce allowed for his interment. The scene is partly in Achilles' camp, and partly in Troy. The games were ended, and the multitude amid the ships their several ways dispersed, some to their supper, some to gentle sleep yielding, delighted. But Achilles still mourned o'er his loved companion. Not on him lighted all-conquering sleep, but to and fro restless he tossed, and on Patroclus thought, his vigour and his courage, all the deeds they two together had achieved, the toils, the perils they had undergone, amid the strife of warriors, and the angry waves. Stirred by such memories, bitter tears he shed. Now turning on his side, and now again upon his back, then prone upon his face, then starting to his feet along the shore, all objectless, despairing, would he roam. Nor did the morn above the sea appearing, unmarked of him, arise. His flying steeds he then would harness, and behind the car the corpse of Hector, trailing in the dust, thrice make the circuit of Patroclus' tomb. Then would he turn within his tent to rest, leaving the prostrate corpse with dust defiled. But from unseemly marks the valiant dead Apollo guarded, who with pity view'd the hero, though in death, and round him threw his golden aegis, nor, though dragged along, allowed his body to receive a wound. Thus foully did Achilles in his rage misuse the mighty dead. The blessed gods with pitying grief beheld the sight, and urged that Hermes should by stealth the corpse remove. The counsel pleased the rest, but Juno still, and Neptune, and the blue-eyed maid retained the hatred, unappeased, with which of old Troy and her king and people they pursued, since Paris to the rival goddesses, who to his sheepfold came, gave deep offence, preferring her who brought him in return the fatal boon of too successful love. But when the 12th revolving day was come, Apollo thus the assembled gods addressed: "Shame on ye, gods, ungrateful! Have ye not, at Hector's hand, of bulls and choicest goats received your offerings meet? And fear ye now e'en his dead corpse to save, and grant his wife, his mother, and his child, his aged sire, and people to behold him, and to raise his funeral pyre, and with due rites entomb? But fell Achilles all your aid commands, of mind unrighteous, and inflexible his stubborn heart. His thoughts are all of blood, e'en as a lion, whom his mighty strength and dauntless courage lead to leap the fold, and 'mid the trembling flocks to seize his prey. E'en so Achilles hath discarded truth, and conscience, arbiter of good and ill. A man may lose his best lov'd friend, a son, or his own mother's son, a brother dear. He mourns and weeps, but time his grief allays, for fate to man a patient mind hath given. But godlike Hector's body, after death, Achilles, unrelenting, foully drags, lash'd to his car, around his comrade's tomb. This is not to his praise, though brave he be. Yet thus our anger he may justly rouse, who in his rage insults the senseless clay." To whom indignant white-arm'd Juno thus: "Some show of reason were there in thy speech, God of the silver bow. Could Hector boast of equal dignity with Peleus' son, a mortal one, and nurs'd at woman's breast, the other of a goddess born, whom I nurtur'd and rear'd, and to a mortal gave in marriage, gave to Peleus, best belov'd by all the immortals of the race of man. Ye gods attended all the marriage rites; thou too, companion base, false friend, wast there, and, playing on thy lyre, didst share the feast." To whom the Cloud Compeller answer'd thus: "Juno, restrain thy wrath; they shall not both attain like honour. Yet was Hector once, of all the mortals that in Ilium dwell, dearest to all the gods, and chief to me; for never did he fail his gifts to bring, and with burnt offerings and libations due my altars crown. Such worship I received. Yet shall bold Hector's body, not without the knowledge of Achilles, be removed; for day and night his goddess mother keeps her constant watch beside him. Then some God bid Thetis hither to my presence haste, and I with prudent words will counsel her, that so Achilles may at Priam's hand large ransom take, and set brave Hector free." He said, and promptly on his errand sprang the storm-swift Iris. Into the dark blue sea she plunged, midway 'twixt Imbros' rugged shore and Samos' isle. The parting waters plash'd, as down to ocean's lowest depths she dropp'd, like to a plummet which the fisherman lets fall, encased in wild bull's horn, to bear destruction to the sea's voracious tribes. There found she Thetis in a hollow cave. Around her ranged the ocean goddesses. She in the midst was weeping o'er the fate her matchless son awaiting, doom'd to die far from his home on fertile plains of Troy. Swift-footed Iris at her side appear'd, and thus address'd her: "Hasten, Thetis! Jove, Lord of immortal counsel, summons thee." To whom the silver-footed goddess thus: "What would with me the mighty King of Heaven? Press'd as I am with grief, I am asham'd to mingle with the gods. Yet will I go, nor shall he speak in vain, whate'er his words." Thus as she spoke, her veil the goddess took, all black, than which none deeper could be found. She rose to go; the storm-swift Iris led the way before her. Ocean's parted waves around their path receded. To the beach ascending, upwards straight to heaven they sprang. The all-seeing son of Saturn there they found, and ranged around him all the immortal gods. Pallas made way, and by the throne of Jove sat Thetis. Juno, proffering to her hand a goblet fair of gold, and adding words of welcome, she the cup received and drank. Then thus began the sire of gods and men: "Thou, Thetis, sorrowing to Olympus com'st, borne down by ceaseless grief. I know it well. Yet hear the cause for which I summon'd thee. About Achilles, thy victorious son, and valiant Hector's body. For 9 days hath contest been in heaven, and some have urged that Hermes should by stealth the corpse remove. This to Achilles' praise I mean to turn, and thus thy reverence and thy love retain. Then haste thee to the camp, and to thy son my message bear. Tell him that all the gods are fill'd with wrath, and I above the rest am angry, that beside the beaked ships he, mad with rage, the corpse of Hector keeps. So may he fear me, and restore the dead. Iris, meantime, to Priam I will send, and bid him seek the Grecian ships, and there obtain his son's release, and with him bring such presents as may melt Achilles' heart." He said. The silver-footed Queen obey'd. Down from Olympus' heights in haste she sped, and sought her son. Him found she in his tent, groaning with anguish, while his comrades round, plying their tasks, prepared the morning meal. For them a goodly sheep, full fleeced, was slain. Close by his side his goddess mother stood, and gently touched him with her hand, and said, "How long, my son, wilt thou thy soul consume with grief and mourning, mindful nor of food nor sleep? Nor dost thou wisely to abstain from woman's love? For short thy time on earth. Death and imperious fate are close at hand. Hear then my words. A messenger from Jove to thee I come, to tell thee that the gods are filled with wrath, and he above the rest is angry that beside the beaked ships thou, mad with rage, the corpse of Hector keep'st. Then ransom take, and liberate the dead." To whom Achilles, swift of foot, replied, "So be it. Ransom let him bring, and bear his dead away, if such the will of Jove." Thus in the concourse of the ships they two, mother and son, their lengthened converse held. Then Saturn's son to Iris gave command, "Haste thee, swift Iris, from Olympus' height, to Troy, to royal Priam bear my words, and bid him seek the Grecian ships, and there obtain his son's release, and with him take such presents as may melt Achilles' heart. Alone, no Trojan with him must he go, yet may a herald on his steps attend, some aged man, his smoothly rolling car and mules to drive, and to the city back to bring his dead, whom great Achilles slew. Nor let the fear of death disturb his mind. Hermes shall with him as his escort go, and to Achilles' presence safely bring, arriv'd within the tent. Nor he himself will slay him, but from others will protect. Not ignorant is he, nor void of sense, nor disobedient to the gods' behest, but will, with pitying eyes, his suppliant." He said, and on his errand sped in haste the storm-swift Iris. When to Priam's house she came, the sounds of wailing met her ear. Within the court, around their father, sat his sons, their raiment all bedewed with tears, and in the midst, close covered with his robe, their sire, his head and neck with dirt defiled, which, wallowing on the earth, himself had heaped with his own hands upon his hoary head. Throughout the house his daughters loudly wailed, in memory of the many and the brave who lay in death, by Grecian warriors slain. Beside him stood the messenger of Jove, and whispered, while his limbs with terror shook, "Fear nothing, Priam, son of Dardanus, nor let thy mind be troubled. Not for ill, but here on kindly errand am I sent. To thee I come, a messenger from Jove, who from on high looks down on thee with eyes of pitying love. He bids thee ransom home the godlike Hector's corpse, and with thee take such presents as may melt Achilles' heart, alone, no Trojan with thee, must thou go. Yet may a herald on thy steps attend, some aged man, thy smoothly rolling car and mules to drive, and to the city back to bring thy dead, whom great Achilles slew. Nor let the fear of death disturb thy mind. Hermes shall with thee, as thine escort, go, and to Achilles' presence safely bring. Arrived within the tent, nor he himself will slay thee, but from others will protect. Not ignorant is he, nor void of sense, nor disobedient to the gods' behest, but will with pitying eyes his suppliant view." Swift-footed Iris said, and vanish'd straight. He to his sons commandment gave, the mules to yoke beneath the smoothly rolling car, and on the axle fix the wicker seat. Himself the lofty cedar chamber sought, fragrant, high-roofed, with countless treasures stored, and called to Hecuba his wife, and said, "Good wife, a messenger from Jove hath come, who bids me seek the Grecian ships, and there obtain my son's release, and with me take such presents as may melt Achilles' heart. Say then, what think'st thou? For my mind inclines to seek the ships within the Grecian camp." So he. But Hecuba, lamenting, cried, "Alas, alas! Where are thy senses gone? And where the wisdom, once of high repute, mid strangers, and mid those o'er whom thou reign'st? How canst thou think alone to seek the ships, entering his presence, who thy sons hath slain, many and brave? An iron heart is thine. Of that bloodthirsty and perfidious man, if thou within the sight and reach shalt come, no pity will he feel, no reverence show. Rather remain we here apart, and mourn. For him, when at his birth his thread of life was spun by fate, 'twas destined that afar from home and parents he should glut the maw of ravening dogs by that stern warrior's tent, whose inmost heart I would I could devour. Such for my son were adequate revenge, whom not in ignominious flight he slew, but standing, thoughtless of escape or flight, for Trojan men and Troy's deep-bosom'd dames." To whom in answer Priam, godlike sire: "Seek not to hinder me, nor be thyself a bird of evil omen in my house, for thou shalt not persuade me. If indeed this message had been brought by mortal man, prophet, or seer, or sacrificing priest, I should have deemed it false, and laughed to scorn the idle tale. But now, for I myself both saw and heard the goddess, I must go, nor unfulfilled shall be the words I speak. And if indeed it be my fate to die beside the vessels of the brass-clad Greeks, I am content. by fierce Achilles' hand let me be slain. So once more in my arms I hold my boy, and give my sorrow vent." Then, raising up the coffer's polish'd lid, he chose 12 gorgeous shawls, 12 single cloaks, as many rugs, as many splendid robes, as many tunics. Then of gold he took 10 talents full, 2 tripods burnish'd bright, 4 cauldrons. Then a cup of beauty rare, a rich possession, which the men of Thrace had given, when there he went, ambassador. In this he spared not, such his keen desire, his son to ransom. From the corridor with angry words he drove the Trojans all. "Out with ye, worthless rascals, vagabonds! Have ye no griefs at home, that here ye come to pester me? Or is it not enough that Jove with deep affliction visits me, slaying my bravest son? Ye to your cost shall know his loss, since now that he is gone, the Greeks shall find you easier far to slay. But may my eyes be closed in death, ere see the city sacked and utterly destroyed." He said, and with his staff drove out the crowd. Before the old man's anger fled they all. Then to his sons in threatening tone he cried, to Paris, Helenus, and Agathon, Pammon, and Typhonus, Polites brave, Deiphobus, and bold Hippothous, and godlike Dius. All these 9, with threats and angry taunts, the aged sire assailed. "Haste, worthless sons, my scandal and my shame! Would that ye all beside the Grecian ships in Hector's stead had died! Oh, woe is me, who have begotten sons in all the land, the best and bravest! Now remains not one, Mestor and Troilus, dauntless charioteer, and Hector, who a god 'mid men appear'd, nor like a mortal's offspring, but a god's. All these hath Mars cut off, and left me none, none but the vile and refuse, liars all, vain skipping coxcombs, in the dance alone, and in naught else renown'd, base plunderers from their own countrymen of lambs and kids. When, laggards, will ye harness me the car, equipped with all things needed for the way?" He said. They quailed beneath their father's wrath, and brought the smoothly running mule wain out, well fram'd, new built, and fix'd the wicker seat. Then from the peg the mule yoke down they took, of boxwood wrought, with boss and rings complete, and with the yoke band brought they forth, 9 cubits long, and to the polish'd pole at the far end attach'd. The breast rings then fix'd to the pole piece, and on either side thrice round the knob the leathern thong they wound, and bound it fast, and inward turn'd the tongue, Then the rich ransom from the chambers bought of Hector's head upon the wain they piled, and yoked the strong-hoofed mules, to harness trained, the Mysians' splendid present to the king. To Priam's car they harnessed then the steeds, which he himself at polish'd manger fed. Deep thoughts revolving in the lofty halls, where met the herald and the aged king. When Hecuba with troubled mind drew near, in her right hand a golden cup she bore of luscious wine, that ere they took their way, they to the gods might due libations pour. Before the car she stood, and thus she spoke: Take, and to Father Jove thine offering pour, and pray that he may bring thee safely home from all thy foes, since sore against my will thou needs wilt venture to the ships of Greece. Then to Idaean Jove, the cloud-girt son of Saturn, who the expanse of Troy surveys, prefer thy prayer, beseeching him to send on thy right hand a winged messenger, the bird he loves the best, of strongest flight, that thou thyself mayst see and know the sign, and firm in faith approach the ships of Greece. But should all-seeing Jove the sign withhold, then not with my consent shouldst thou attempt, whate'er thy wish, to reach the Grecian ships. To whom in answer godlike Priam thus: O woman, I refuse not to obey thy counsel. Good it is to raise the hands in prayer to heaven, and Jove's protection seek. The old man said, and bade the attendants pour pure water on his hands. With ewer she, and basin, stood beside him. From his wife, the due ablutions made, he took the cup. Then in the centre of the court he stood, and as he poured the wine, looked up to heaven, and thus with voice uplifted prayed aloud: O Father Jove, who rul'st on Ida's height, most great, most glorious, grant that I may find some pity in Achilles' heart, and send on my right hand a winged messenger, the bird thou lov'st the best, of strongest flight, that I myself may see and know the sign, and firm in faith approach the ships of Greece. Thus as he prayed, the Lord of counsel heard, and sent forthwith an eagle, feather'd king, dark bird of chase, and dusky thence surnamed. Wide as the portals, well secured with bolts that guard some wealthy monarch's lofty hall, on either side his ample pinions spread. On the right hand appear'd he, far above the city, soaring. They the fav'ring sign with joy beheld, and every heart was cheer'd. Mounting his car, in haste, the aged king drove through the court, and through the echoing porch. The mules in front, by sage Idaeus driven, that drew the four-wheel'd wain. Behind them came the horses, down the city's steep descent, urged by the old man to speed. The crowd of friends that followed mourned for him as doomed to death. Descended from the city to the plain, his sons and sons-in-law to Ilium took their homeward way. Advancing o'er the plain, they too escaped not Jove's all-seeing eye. Pitying, he saw the aged sire, and thus at once to Hermes spoke, his much-loved son. Hermes, for thou in social converse lov'st to mix with men, and hear'st whome'er thou wilt, haste thee, and Priam to the Grecian ships so lead, that none of all the Greeks may see, ere at Achilles' presence he attain. He said, nor disobey'd the heavenly guide. His golden sandals on his feet he bound, ambrosial work, which bore him o'er the waves, swift as the wind, and o'er the wide-spread earth. Then took his rod, wherewith he seals at will the eyes of men, and wakes again from sleep. This in his hand he bore, and sprang for flight. Soon the wide-spread Hellespont he reach'd, and Troy, and pass'd in likeness of a princely youth in opening manhood, fairest term of life. The twain had passed by Ilus' lofty tomb, and halted there the horses and the mules beside the margin of the stream to drink, for darkness now was creeping o'er the earth. When through the gloom the herald Hermes saw approaching near, to Priam thus he cried, O son of Dardanus, bethink ye well, of prudent counsel great is now our need. A man I see, and fear he means us ill. Say, with the horses shall we fly at once, or clasp his knees, and for his mercy sue? The old man heard, his mind confused with dread. So grievously he fear'd, that every hair upon his bended limbs did stand on end. He stood astounded. But the guardian God approach'd, and took him by the hand, and said, Where, father, goest thou, thus with horse and mule, in the still night, when men are sunk in sleep? And fearest thou not the slaughter-breathing Greeks, thine unrelenting foes, and they so near? If any one of them should see thee now, so richly laden in the gloom of night, how wouldst thou feel? Thou art young thyself, and this old man, thy comrade, would avail but little to protect thee from assault. I will not harm thee, nay, will shield from harm, for, like my father's is, methinks, thy face. To whom in answer Priam, godlike sire: 'Tis as thou say'st, fair son, yet hath some God extended o'er me his protecting hand, who sends me such a guide, so opportune. Bless'd are thy parents in a son so grac'd, in face and presence, and of a mind so wise. To whom in answer thus the guardian God: O father, Well and wisely dost thou speak. But tell me this, and truly, dost thou bear these wealthy treasures to some foreign land, that they for thee in safety may be stored? Or have ye all resolved to fly from Troy, in fear, your bravest slain, thy gallant son, who never from the Greeks' encounter flinch'd? To whom in answer Priam, godlike sire: Who art thou, noble sir, and what thy race, that speak'st thus fairly of my hapless son? To whom in answer thus the guardian God: Try me, old man, of godlike Hector ask, for often in the glory-giving fight these eyes have seen him, chief, when to the ships the Greeks he drove, and with the sword destroyed. We gazed in wonder, from the fight restrained by Peleus' son, with Agamemnon wroth. His follower I, one ship convey'd us both. One of the Myrmidons I am, my sire Polyctor rich, but aged, e'en as thou. 6 sons he hath, besides myself, the 7th, and I by lot was drafted for the war. I from the ships am to the plain come forth, for with the dawn of day the keen-eyed Greeks will round the city marshal their array. They chafe in idleness, the chiefs in vain strive to restrain their ardour for the fight. To whom in answer Priam, godlike sire: If from Achilles, Peleus' son, thou art indeed a follower, tell me all the truth. Lies yet my son beside the Grecian ships, or hath Achilles torn him limb from limb, and to his dogs the mangled carcass given? To whom in answer thus the guardian God: On him, old man, nor dogs nor birds have fed, but by the ship of Peleus' son he lies within the tent. 12 days he there hath lain, nor hath corruption touch'd his flesh, nor worms that wont to prey on men in battle slain. The corpse indeed, with each returning morn, around his comrade's tomb Achilles drags, yet leaves it still uninjured. Thou thyself mightst see how fresh, as dew besprent, he lies, from bloodstains cleansed, and closed his many wounds. For many a lance was buried in his corpse. So e'en in death the blessed gods above, who loved him well, protect thy noble son." He said. The old man, rejoicing, heard his words, and answered, "See, my son, how good it is to give the immortal gods their tribute due. For never did my son, while yet he lived, neglect the gods who on Olympus dwell, and thence have they remembered him in death. Accept, I pray, this goblet, rich embossed. Be thou my guard, and under heaven my guide, until I reach the tent of Peleus' son." To whom in answer thus the guardian God: "Old father, Me, thy younger, wouldst thou tempt in vain, who bidst me at thy hands accept thy proffered presents. To Achilles is wrong, I dread his anger, and hold it shame to plunder him, though through fear of future ill. But as thy guide, I could conduct thee safe as far as Argos, journeying by thy side, on shipboard or on foot, nor by the fault of thy conductor shouldst thou meet with harm." Thus spoke the guardian God, and on the car mounting in haste, he took the whip and reins, and with fresh vigour mules and horses filled. When to the ship towers and the trench they came, the guard had late been busied with their meal, and with deep sleep the heavenly guide o'erspread the eyes of all. Then opened wide the gates, and pushed aside the bolts, and led within both Priam and the treasure-laden wain. But when they reach'd Achilles' lofty tent, which for their king the Myrmidons had built, of fir trees fell'd, and overlaid the roof with rushes mown from off the neighbouring mead, and all around a spacious court enclosed with cross-set palisades. A single bar of fir the gateway guarded, which to shut 3 men of all the others scarce sufficed, and 3 to open. But Achilles' hand, unaided, shut with ease the massive bar. Then for the old man Hermes oped the gate, and brought him within the court the gifts designed for Peleus' godlike son. Then from the car sprang to the ground, and thus to Priam spoke: "Old man, a God hath hither been thy guide. Hermes I am, and sent to thee from Jove, Father of all, to bring thee safely here. I now return, nor to Achilles' eyes will I appear. Beseems it not a God to greet a mortal in the sight of all? Go thou in, and clasp Achilles' knees, and supplicate him for his father's sake, his fair-haired mother's, and his child's, that so thy words may stir an answer in his heart." Thus saying, Hermes to Olympus' heights return'd, and Priam from his chariot sprang, and left Idaeus there in charge to keep the horses and the mules, while he himself enter'd the dwelling straight, where wont to sit Achilles, lov'd of heav'n. The chief he found within, his followers seated all apart. 2 only in his presence minister'd, the brave Automedon and Alcimus, a warrior bold. Scarce ended the repast of food and wine, the table still was set. Great Priam enter'd, unperceived of all, and, standing by Achilles, with his arms embraced his knees, and kissed those fearful hands, blood-stained, which many of his sons had slain. As when a man, by cruel fate pursued, in his own land hath shed another's blood, and, flying, seeks beneath some wealthy house a foreign refuge, wondering all behold. On godlike Priam so with wonder gazed Achilles, Wonder seized the attendants all, and one to other looked. Then Priam thus to Peleus' son his suppliant speech addressed. Think, great Achilles, rival of the gods, upon thy father, e'en as I myself upon the threshold of unjoyous age. And haply he from them that dwell around may suffer wrong, with no protector near to give him aid. Yet he, rejoicing, knows that thou still liv'st, and day by day may hope to see his son returning safe from Troy, while I, all hapless that have many sons, the best and bravest through the breadth of Troy begotten, deem that none are left me now. 50 there were, when came the sons of Greece, 19 the offspring of a single womb, the rest the women of my household bore. Of these have many by relentless Mars been laid in the dust, but he, my only one, the city's and his brethren's sole defence, he, bravely fighting in his country's cause, Hector, but lately by thy hand hath fallen. On his behalf I venture to approach the Grecian ships, for his release to thee to make my prayer, and priceless ransom pay. Then thou, Achilles, reverence the gods, and for thy father's sake look pitying down on me, more needing pity, since I bear such grief as never man on earth hath borne, who stoop to kiss the hand that slew my son. Thus as he spoke, within Achilles' breast fond memory of his father rose. He touched the old man's hand, and gently put him by. Then wept they both, by various memories stirred. One, prostrate at Achilles' feet, bewailed his warrior son. Achilles for his sire, and for Patroclus wept, his comrade dear. And through the house their weeping loud was heard. End of Book 24. Book 24, Part 2 of the Iliad of Homer, rendered into English blank verse by Edward, Earl of Derby. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Your reader, Michael Armenta. But when Achilles had indulged his grief, and eased the yearning of his heart and limbs, uprising, with his hand the aged sire, pitying his hoary head and hoary beard, he raised, and thus with gentle words addressed. Alas, what sorrows, poor old man, are thine! How couldst thou venture to the Grecian ships alone, and to the presence of the man whose hand hath slain so many of thy sons, many and brave? An iron heart is thine. But sit thou on this seat, and in our hearts, though filled with grief, let us that grief suppress, for woeful lamentation not avails. Such is the thread the gods for mortals spin, to live in woe, while they from cares are free. 2 coffers lie beside the door of Jove, with gifts for man, one good, the other ill, to whom from each the Lord of lightning gives. Him sometimes evil, sometimes good befalls. To whom the ill alone, him foul disgrace and grinding misery o'er the earth pursue. By God and man alike despised he roams. Thus from his birth the gods to Peleus gave excellent gifts, with wealth and substance blessed, above his fellows. O'er the Myrmidons he ruled with sovereign sway, and heaven bestowed on him a mortal, an immortal bride. Yet this of ill was mingled in his lot, that in his house no rising race he saw of future kings. One only son he had, one doom'd to early death. Nor is it mine to tend my father's age, but far from home thee and thy sons in Troy I vex with war. Much have we heard too of thy former wealth, above what Lesbos northward Macar's seat contains, and upper Phrygia, and the shores of boundless Hellespont. 'Tis said that thou in wealth and number of thy sons wast blessed. But since on thee this curse the gods have brought, still round thy city war and murder rage. Bear up, nor thus with grief incessant mourn. Vain is thy sorrow for thy gallant son. Thou canst not raise him, and mayst suffer more. To whom in answer Priam, godlike sire: Tell me not yet, illustrious chief, to sit while Hector lies uncared for in the tent, but let me quickly go, that with mine eyes I may behold my son. And thou accept the ample treasures which we tender thee. Mayst thou enjoy them, and in safety reach thy native land, since thou hast spared my life, and bidst me still behold the light of heaven. To whom Achilles thus with stern regard: Old man, incense me not. I mean myself to give thee back thy son. For here of late, dispatch'd by Jove, my goddess mother came, the daughter of the aged ocean god. And thee too, Priam, well I know, some god, I cannot err, hath guided to our ships. No mortal, though in vent'rous youth, would dare our camp to enter, nor could hope to pass unnoticed by the watch, nor easily remove the ponderous bar that guards our doors. But stir not up my anger in my grief, lest, suppliant though thou be, within my tent I brook thee not, and Jove's command transgress." He said. The old man trembled and obeyed. Then to the doorway, with a lion's spring, Achilles rush'd, not unaccompanied, with him Automedon and Elymus, his 2 attendants, of his followers all, next to the lost Patroclus, best esteem'd. They from the yoke the mules and horses loosed, then led the herald of the old man in, and bade him sit, and from the polish'd wain the costly ransom took of Hector's head. 2 robes they left, and 1 well-woven vest, to clothe the corpse, and send with honour home. Then to the female slaves he gave command to wash the body, and anoint with oil, apart, that Priam not see his son, lest his grieved heart its passion unrestrained should utter, and Achilles, roused to wrath, his suppliant slay, and Jove's command transgress. When they had washed the body, and with oil anointed, and around it wrapped the robe and vest, Achilles lifted up the dead with his own hands, and laid him on the couch, which to the polish'd wain his followers raised. Then, groaning, on his friend by name he called. "Forgive, Patroclus, be not wroth with me, if, in the realm of darkness, thou shouldst hear that godlike Hector to his father's arms for no mean ransom I restore, whereof a fitting share for thee I set aside." This said, Achilles to the tent returned. On the carved couch, from whence he rose, he sat beside the wall, and thus to Priam spoke: "Old man, thy son, according to thy prayer, is given thee back. Upon the couch he lies. Thyself shalt see him at the dawn of day. Meanwhile the evening meal demands our care. Not fair-hair'd Niobe abstained from food, when in the house her children lay in death. 6 beauteous daughters, and 6 stalwart sons. The youths Apollo with his silver bow, the maids the archer-queen Diana slew, with anger fill'd that Niobe presum'd herself with fair Latona to compare, her many children with her rivals 2. So by the 2 were all the many slain. 9 days in death they lay, and none was there to pay their funeral rites. For Saturn's son had given to all the people hearts of stone. At length the immortal gods entombed the dead, nor yet did Niobe, when now her grief had worn itself in tears, from food refrain. And now in Sipylus, amid the rocks and lonely mountains, where the goddess nymphs that love to dance by Achelous' stream, 'tis said, were cradled, she, though turn'd to stone, broods o'er the wrongs inflicted by the gods. So we too, godlike sire, the meal may share, and later thou thy noble son mayst mourn, to Troy restor'd. Well worthy he thy tears." This said, he slaughter'd straight a white-fleeced sheep. His comrades then the carcass flay'd and dress'd, the meat prepar'd, and, fasten'd to the spits, roasted with care, and from the fire withdrew. The bread Automedon from baskets fair apportioned out. The meat Achilles shared. They on the viands set before them fell. The rage of thirst and hunger satisfied, in wonder Priam on Achilles gazed, his form and stature, as a god he seem'd. and he too looked on Priam, and admired his venerable face and gracious speech. With mutual pleasure each on other gazed, till godlike Priam first addressed his host. "Dismiss me now, illustrious chief, to rest, and lie we down, in gentle slumbers wrapped. For never have mine eyes been closed in sleep, since by thy hand my gallant son was slain. But groaning still I brood upon my woes, and in my court with dust my head defile. Now have I tasted bread, now ruddy wine hath o'er my palate passed, but not till now." Thus he. His comrades and the attendant maids Achilles order'd in the corridor 2 mattresses to place, with blankets fair, of purple wool o'erlaid, and on the top rugs and soft sheets for upper covering spread. They from the chamber, torch in hand, withdrew, and with obedient haste 2 beds prepared. Then thus Achilles spoke in jesting tone: "Thou needs must sleep without, my good old friend, lest any leader of the Greeks should come, as is their custom, to confer with me. Of them whosoe'er shall find thee here by night, forthwith to Agamemnon would report, and Hector might not be so soon restor'd. But tell me truly this, how many days for godlike Hector's funeral rites ye need, that for so long a time I may myself refrain from combat, and the people stay?" To whom in answer Priam, godlike sire: "If by thy leave we may indeed perform his funeral rites, to thee, Achilles, great will be our gratitude, if this thou grant. Thou know'st how close the town is hemm'd around, and from the mountain, distant as it is, the Trojans well may fear to draw the wood. 9 days to public mourning would we give, the 10th to funeral rites and funeral feast. Then on the 11th would we raise his mound, the 12th renew the war, if needs we must." To whom Achilles, swift of foot, replied: "So shall it be, old Priam. I engage to stay the battle for the time required." Thus speaking, with his hand the old man's wrist he grasped, in token that he need not fear. Then in the corridor lay down to rest old Priam and the herald, elders sage, while in his tent's recess Achilles slept, the fair Briseis resting by his side. In night-long slumbers lay the other gods and helmet chiefs, by gentle sleep subdued. But on the eyes of Hermes, guardian god, no slumber fell, deep pondering in his mind how from the ships in safety to conduct the royal Priam and the guard elude. Above the sleeper's head he stood and cried: "Old man, small heed thou tak'st of coming ill, who, when Achilles gives thee leave to go, sleep'st undisturbed, surrounded by thy foes. Thy son hath been restor'd, and thou hast paid a generous price. But to redeem thy life, if Agamemnon and the other Greeks should know that thou art here, full thrice so much thy sons, who yet are left, would have to pay." He said. The old man trembled, and aroused the herald, while the horses and the mules were yoked by Hermes, who with silent speed drove through the encampment, unobserved of all. But when they came to eddying Xanthus' ford, fair flowing stream, born of immortal Jove, to high Olympus Hermes took his flight, as morn in saffron robe o'er all the earth was light diffusing. They with funeral wail drove cityward the horses. Following came the mules that drew the litter of the dead. The plain they traversed o'er, observed of none, or man or woman, till Cassandra fair as golden Venus, from the topmost height of Pergamus, her father in his car, upstanding, saw. The herald at his side him too she saw, who on the litter lay. Then lifted up her voice, and cried aloud to all the city, "Hither, Trojans, come, both men and women! Hector see, restored! If while he lived, returning from the fight, ye met him ere rejoicing, who indeed was all the city's chiefest joy and pride." She said, nor man nor woman then was left within the city. O'er the minds of all grief passed, resistless. To the gates in throngs they pressed, to crowd round him who brought the dead. The first to clasp the body were his wife and honour'd mother. Eagerly they sprang on the smooth rolling wain to touch the head of Hector. Round them, weeping, stood the crowd weeping, till sunset all the livelong day had they before the gates for Hector mourned, had not old Priam from the car addressed the crowd. "Make way, that so the mules may pass. When to my house I shall have brought my dead, ye there may vent your sorrow as ye will." Thus as he spoke, obedient to his word, they stood aside, and for the car made way. But when to Priam's lordly house they came, they laid him on a rich wrought couch, and called the minstrels in, who by the hero's bed should lead the melancholy chorus. They poured forth the music of the mournful dirge, while women's voices joined in loud lament. White-arm'd Andromache the wail began, the head of Hector clasping in her hands. "My husband, thou art gone in pride of youth, and in thine house hast left me desolate. Thy child an infant still, thy child and mine, unhappy parents both. Nor dare I hope that he may reach the ripeness of his youth, for ere that day shall Troy in ruin fall, since thou art gone, her guardian, thou whose arm defended her, her wives, and helpless babes. They now shall shortly o'er the sea be borne, and with them I shall go. Thou too, my child, must follow me, to servile labour doom'd, the suff'ring victim of a tyrant lord, unless perchance some angry Greek may seize and dash thee from the tower, a woful death. Whose brother or whose father or whose son by Hector hath been slain, for many a Greek by Hector's hand hath bit the bloody dust. Not light in battle was thy father's hand. Therefore for him the general city mourns. Thou to thy parents' bitter grief hast caused, Hector, but bitterest grief of all hast left to me. For not to me was given to clasp the hand extended from thy dying bed, nor words of wisdom catch, which night and day with tears I might have treasured in my heart. Weeping she spoke. The women joined her wail. Then Hecuba took up the loud lament. Hector, of all my children dearest thou, dear to the immortals too, in life wast thou, and they in death have borne thee still in mind. For other of my sons, his captives made, across the watery waste to Samos' isle, or Imbros, or the inhospitable shore of Lemnos, hath Achilles, swift of foot, to slavery sold. Thee, when his sharp-edged spear hath robbed thee of thy life, he dragged indeed around Patroclus' tomb, his comrade dear, whom thou hadst slain. Yet so he raised not up his dead to life again. Now liest thou there, all fresh and fair, as dew besprent, like one whom bright Apollo, with his arrows keen, God of the silver bow, hath newly slain. Weeping she spoke, and roused the general grief. Then Helen third the mournful strain renewed. Hector, of all my brethren dearest thou, true godlike Paris claims me as his wife, who bore me hither. Would I then had died! But 20 years have passed since here I came, and left my native land. Yet ne'er from thee I heard one scornful, one degrading word, as when from others I have borne reproach, thy brothers, sisters, or thy brothers' wives, or mother. For thy sire was ever kind, e'en as a father. Thou hast check'd them still with tender feeling, and with gentle words. For thee I weep, and for myself no less. For through the breadth of Troy none love me now, none kindly look on me, but all abhor. Weeping she spoke, and with her wept the crowd. At length the aged Priam gave command. Haste now, ye Trojans, to the city bring good store of fuel. Fear no treach'rous wile, for when he sent me from the dark-ribb'd ships, Achilles promised that from hostile arms till the 12th morn we should no harm sustain. He said, and they the oxen and the mules yoked to the wains, and from the city thronged. 9 days they labour'd, and brought back to Troy good store of wood. But when the 10th day's light upon the earth appear'd, weeping they bore brave Hector out, and on the funeral pile laying the glorious dead, applied the torch. While yet the rosy-fingered morn was young, round noble Hector's pyre the people pressed. When all were gathered round and closely thronged, first on the burning mass, as far as spread the range of fire, they poured the ruddy wine, and quenched the flames. His brethren then, and friends, weeping, the hot tears flowing down their cheeks, collected from the pile the whitened bones. These in a golden casket they enclosed, and o'er it spread soft shawls of purple dye. Then in a grave they laid it, and in haste with stone in ponderous masses covered o'er, and raised a mound, and watched on every side from sudden inroad of the Greeks to guard. The mound erected, back they turned, and all, assembled duly, shared the solemn feast in Priam's palace, heaven-descended king. Such were the rites to glorious Hector paid. End of Book 24, Part 2. End of the Iliad of Homer, rendered into English blank verse by Edward, Earl of Derby. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.